The largest territory of the Westerosi continent, the North was a land of vast forests and snow-capped mountains, where summers were cold and winters devastating. Long before the migration of men, these lands were populated by a race of giants who grew between 10 and 12 feet tall, and the Children of the Forest, a mysterious and magical people, small in stature, dark and beautiful. The Children were a Stone Age culture who carved faces into weirwood trees, worshipping them as gods and believing that when they died, their spirits would live on in the trees, keeping watch over the forests. Many of the Children possessed magical abilities, able to skin change, sending their consciousness into the body of an animal, and possessing the green sight, which granted them prophetic dreams. However, 12,000 years before Aegon's conquest, a Bronze Age people known as the First Men began their migration west, crossing through the Arm of Dorne in the far south, which connected their continent to Essos, the land beyond the Narrow Sea. Some say these people were led by the first king, who journeyed across much of Westeros, until at last laid to rest in the Barrowlands of the north. The First Men brought new technologies and cultural practices to the continent, introducing metal, horses, and pagan gods, as well as a writing system of runes whose meaning was largely lost over time. As they settled the land, they waged war against the Children of the Forest, who became so desperate to defend their homeland, they attempted 2 great magical rituals, with the first shattering the Arm of Dorne to halt the continued migration of men into the continent. Despite this victory, the war continued growing more aggressive and forced the Children to retreat into the north, where they performed a second great ritual, possibly from the Children's Tower of Moat Cailin, calling upon the gods to send the Hammer of the Waters to shatter the neck of the Westerosi continent and split the landmass in 2, but they ultimately failed and merely flooded the territory, creating swamps and marshlands. Eventually, the First Men met with the Children on the Isle of Faces, reaching a peace agreement known as the Pact, which gave the native race dominion over the deep woods, while the First Men took the open lands, and over time, many adopted the worship of the old gods. Unfortunately, the years of war left both the Children of the Forest and Giant race with severely reduced populations, beginning their descent into near extinction, with only a small number surviving in the far north. Following the years of war came the Age of Heroes, when legends say great men and women roamed the lands of Westeros, establishing houses and realms that would endure for thousands of years to come. Unfortunately, a terrible calamity eventually fell upon them, with the Long Night believed to have occurred between 8 and 6,000 years before conquest. For a generation, Westeros suffered from a harsh winter and darkness, while a race of strange creatures known as the Others or White Walkers descended upon them from the lands of always winter. Stories describe them as tall and gaunt, with skin as pale as milk, and eyes that shine bright blue, wearing camouflage armor and wielding magical swords of ice. For years they wreaked havoc across the land, until stories say the legendary Last Hero journeyed deep into the north, wielding dragon steel to recruit the Children of the Forest into helping humanity in their struggle. As the war continued on, an organization known as the Night's Watch formed to fight against the invaders, finally achieving victory at the Battle for the Dawn. The others were then pushed back to the lands of always winter, not seen again for thousands of years. Following the end of the Long Night, a great wall was built in the far north, with the Children of the Forest casting defensive spells upon the ice. The Night's Watch were then given command, swearing oaths to guard the realms of men from any threat beyond the wall. Perhaps the most well-known Northman of this age, Bran the Builder, was credited with the creation of the wall, and also gifted lands to the Night's Watch so they could sustain themselves. Many claim it was Bran the Builder who founded House Stark, built Winterfell, and was crowned first King of Winter. With his legend growing so large, he was featured in Southern stories as well, believed to have aided in the construction of Storm's End and the Hightower. Others in the north also claim a connection to this ancient past, with House Bolton descending from the Red Kings of the Dreadfort, while House Dustin derived from the Barrow Kings, who in turn claimed descent from the First King, the men who led their people into Westeros. Then there were the Crannog men of the Neck, who proclaimed the Marsh King as their ancestor, a man who rode lizard lions and wielded a frog spear as he defended the north from southern invaders. And while he was remembered as a king, he never put himself above his people, considered instead to be a first among equals. In the years following the creation of the Wall, those First Men trapped on the northern side started to develop their own culture of fierce independence, becoming known as the Free Folk or Wildlings, and growing to hate the people of the South who lived in warmth and relative luxury. Though they valued their independence, the free folk would occasionally unite to follow a king beyond the wall, often in the hopes of finding a way to raid or take lands in the south. And so when the 13th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch betrayed his oath and tried to declare himself the Night's King alongside the Night's Queen, the King of Winter entered into an uneasy alliance with Joramun, King Beyond the Wall, attacking together and defeating their enemy to free the Watch from his brutal reign. After thousands of years prospering as the dominant population of Westeros, the First Men were eventually supplanted by a new people sailing from across the Narrow Sea, beginning their own period of western migration. Although many date the start of the Andal invasion to 6,000 years before conquest, some maesters argue it was nearer to 4,000, while others still say 2,000. According to the legends of these tall, fair-haired invaders, the lands of Westeros were promised to them by their god who appeared in the form of 7 deities, and crowned Hugor of the Hill as their first king, proclaiming that his people would establish a mighty kingdom in a foreign land. Yet most maesters disregard such stories, and instead believe the migration occurred as a result of the Valyrian freehold expanding into western Essos, leading many of the Andals to flee from the approaching Dragon Lords. An Iron Age people, the Andals conquered or intermarried with much of the south, successfully spreading their language, culture, and religion, but had far less success in their attempted invasion of the north. Unwilling to allow their territory to fall to these foreign conquerors, King Theon of House Stark allied with the Red King of House Bolton to defeat the Andal warlord Argos Sevenstar at the Battle of the Weeping Water. Following their victory, King Theon, also known as the Hungry Wolf, sailed his ships across the Narrow Sea and attacked their enemy's homeland of Andalos in retribution, slaying many and displaying their heads along the eastern coast of the Northern Territory to deter future attacks. Sometime later, the Andals attempted another invasion, this time marching north through the Neck, only to be thrown back by the Crannog men, eventually retreating and accepting First Men rule in the north. As a consequence of the years of war and migration, the Andal language, system of writing, use of iron, traditions of knighthood, and chivalry took hold in the southern realms, leaving the north as the only major territory where First Men culture and tradition survived. Since first establishing themselves in Winterfell alongside nearby Wintertown, House Stark expanded to control much of the northern territory of Westeros, defeating rival rulers like the Barrow Kings of the Barrowlands in the famed Thousand-Year War that was more likely a series of wars over approximately 200 years. In time, they defeated other northern kings, such as those of House Flint of Breakstone Hill, the Slates of Blackpool, the Umbers of Last Hearth, the Locks of Oldcastle, the Glovers of Deepwood Motte, the Fishers of Stony Shore, and the Riders of the Rills. They also conquered House Greenwood, Towers, Amber, Frost, and may have possibly driven House Blackwood out of the north, as they claim to have once ruled the entirety of the Wolfswood. Legends claim House Stark also fought a war for Sea Dragon Point against the Warg King and his allies, which included Greenseers, Skin Changers, and Children of the Forest. But eventually, the Starks prevailed, killing the Warg King and his sons, while taking his daughters as captives. Under King Jon Stark, they built the Wolf's Den to defend the White Knife River, while his son Rickard Stark defeated the Marsh King and married his daughter to take control of the Neck. Under King Brandon IX, they put down the raiding parties of Skagos in the east, where savage men were said to eat human flesh, and in the west, Roderick Stark was said to have won Bear Island from the Ironborn in a wrestling match, before giving it to House Mormont. As the Ironborn had a long history of raiding and occupying the western coast, a number of Stark kings, such as Theon the Hungry Wolf, led armies to repel their forces, though these confrontations gradually diminished following the rule of Roderick Stark. Over thousands of years, many of the houses that once fought against the Starks became loyal vassals. However, others, like the Red Kings of the Dreadfort, were not so willing to bend the knee. Known to be cruel and merciless, the men of House Bolton were said to flay their enemies, claiming to have made cloaks from the skins of captured Starks. Many wars were fought between these competing factions, and while King Royce Bolton II captured and burned Winterfell, as did his descendant King Royce IV, House Stark was ultimately victorious, with the Red King Rogar the Huntsman swearing fealty during the years of the Andal invasion. Nevertheless, House Bolton remained one of Winterfell's less reliable vassals, with a long history of rebellion. Occasionally, the northern realm of House Stark expanded to include the islands of the Three Sisters, who were traditionally an independent power with a unique culture and religion, worshipping the Lord of the Skies and Lady of the Waves. However, they were conquered for a time by King Theon Stark, who also landed an army on the Fingers of the Vale, and eventually these raids led to the rape of the Three Sisters, where stories say the Northmen committed terrible crimes, like killing children and cooking them in pots. Other legends claim the Northmen disemboweled prisoners and executed 3,000 warriors in a day, with some even saying Lord Balthazar Bolton made a pink pavilion from the skins of 100 sistermen. Desperate to remove the Northmen, the people of the Sisters swore fealty to King Mathos Aaron II of the Vale, resulting in the War Across the Waters, or the Worthless War, in which the Wolf's Den was besieged and burned, prompting the King of Winter to authorize an attack on Galltown, burning the enemy fleet. After control of the islands changed hands over a dozen times, the Northmen finally lost interest in the war and allowed the Vale to keep their holdings. Roughly 1,000 years before Aegon's conquest, as House Manderly grew rich from trade along the Mander River in the Reach, King Perceon Gardner III started to see them as rivals to his power, sending them into exile and giving their lands and castles to House Peak. Faced with the possible extinction of their house, the Manderlys found their saviors in the Winter Kings of House Stark, who welcomed them as bannermen in the north, granting them the castle of the Wolf's Den and charging them with the protection of the White Knife. Although the Manderlys came to consider themselves proud northerners, they also held on to their southern heritage, worshipping the new gods of the Faith of the Seven and becoming one of the only northern territories to promote knighthood. Nevertheless, the Manderlys were extremely grateful to the Starks for saving their house, and remained staunch loyalists for many years to come. Using the wealth they brought from the Reach, House Manderly built the city of White Harbor, developing a bustling trade economy that would make them the richest house in the north. Just as the western coast was subject to raids from the Ironborn, pirates and slavers from across the Narrow Sea regularly plundered the eastern coast. And so after defeating troublesome sea raiders in one of these attacks, Carlon Stark was rewarded with lands and titles, allowing him to form House Karstark of Karhold. After thousands of years spent defeating their rivals and resisting invasion from the south, the seas, and beyond the Wall, the Kings of Winter faced yet another threat against the north when the Dragon Lords of House Targaryen landed an army in Blackwater Bay. Following the doom of Valyria and Century of Blood, House Targaryen of Dragonstone became the last known family to possess living dragons, and used this advantage to organize the invasion of Westeros, seeking to conquer all 7 kingdoms south of the Wall. Although many resisted, only the territory of Dorne was able to maintain their sovereignty, though at a cost of many lives during the 2 Dornish wars that followed the initial conflict. After defeating the Kingdom of Isles and Rivers, the Westerlands, the Reach, and the Stormlands, the Targaryen army went north to face King Torrhen Stark of Winterfell, who'd marched 30,000 men into the Riverlands. Despite being outnumbered, many Northmen wanted to attack, including the king's bastard half-brother Brandon Snow, who offered to sneak into the enemy camp and assassinate the dragons. But having heard the stories about the burning of Harrenhal and Field of Fire, King Torrhen chose peace, sending his brother Brandon and a party of maesters to negotiate the terms of their surrender. Though he saved many lives with his decision, Torrhen Stark was remembered as the king who knelt, forced to give up his crown and accept the titles Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North. However, not all Northmen were willing to bend the knee like their king, with some instead choosing exile and sailing across the Narrow Sea to become sellswords and form the Company of the Rose. Under the Targaryen kings, the North was largely allowed to continue ruling themselves, so long as they paid taxes to the Iron Throne and kept the king's peace. Yet at times, the Northmen found themselves at odds with the Targaryens, like when Lord Ellard Stark objected to the demands of good Queen Alysanne, wife of King Jaehaerys the Conciliator, when she gifted a portion of the North to the Night's Watch. However, the pleas of House Stark were ignored, and the new gift, as it was known, went on to help sustain the Black Brothers in their continuing service to the realm. During the Dance of the Dragon's civil war, Lord Cregan Stark of Winterfell sided with the Black faction fighting for Queen Rhaenyra Targaryen against her younger half-brother Aegon II, negotiating the Pact of Ice and Fire, wherein House Stark was promised a Targaryen bride in exchange for their support. With winter approaching, Lord Cregan Stark started to gather together a massive army, recruiting childless, homeless, and unwed men, as well as young sons, hoping to spare their families the burden of supporting them during the difficult years to come. However, due to the size of the Northern Territory, it took 2 years to properly prepare their forces, and so Lord Stark also sent a smaller army of 2,000 men to march south more quickly, known as the Winter Wolves, under the command of Roderick Dustin. Mounted atop shaggy horses, the Winter Wolves proved devastating in battle, defeating Lannister spearmen at the Battle of the Lakeshore and killing Sir Criston Cole in the Butcher's Ball. Yet the Northmen were finally defeated at the First Battle of Tumbleton, when they were betrayed by the Dragon Riders Ulf the White and Hard Hugh Hammer, 2 low-born men who'd risen in status due to their ability to bond with a dragon. Another group hailing from the north were the Knights of White Harbor, led by the brothers Sir Medric and Sir Torrin Manderly, sent to serve Queen Rhaenyra directly during her time in the capital. Yet as the war went on, King's Landing began to rebel against the Black Faction Queen, and so the Manderly brothers asked Rhaenyra to come with them to White Harbor so she might be protected. However, the Queen instead chose to leave the Manderlys behind and traveled to Dragonstone, where she was betrayed, captured, and killed by the enemy. After 2 years of preparation, the Great Northern Host under Cregan Stark was at last ready to march south, but were now facing a far different situation than the one they had originally anticipated. With the death of Queen Rhaenyra, King Aegon II sat atop the Iron Throne. However, with the realm still divided, the extent of his power did not reach much further than the capital. Fearing the massive northern army approaching, Aegon's remaining advisors urged him to sue for peace, but he refused and so was poisoned to death in order to place Rhaenyra's firstborn son on the throne, known to history as King Aegon III. Although the Black Faction was technically victorious, Cregan Stark was furious that his men were denied battle, and so took charge of King's Landing, ruling with an iron fist for 6 days in what came to be known as the Hour of the Wolf. During this time, 22 were arrested for the poisoning of Aegon II, with Lord Corlys Velaryon negotiating a pardon, while the others either joined the Night's Watch or faced execution. After finishing his business in the south, Cregan Stark was held in high regard by the court of King Aegon III. However, a princess of House Targaryen was never actually delivered to the Starks, leaving the Pact of Ice and Fire ultimately unfulfilled. Although the Starks remained in power throughout the years of Targaryen rule, they faced a number of threats against them, like the failed Skagosi Rebellion during the reign of King Daeron II, which went on for years and claimed the lives of many, including Lord Barthagen Stark. There was also the Ironborn Reavers under Lord Dagon Greyjoy, who attacked the western coast during the reign of King Aerys I, only to be repelled by the forces of Lord Baron Stark. The North then faced yet another bloody confrontation in 226 AC, when the King Beyond the Wall, Raymond Redbeard, led his people past the Night's Watch, only to be defeated by the combined army of Lord Willem Stark and Lord Harmond Umber at the Battle of the Long Lake. The largest of the 7 kingdoms of Westeros, some believed the North was capable of raising up to 45,000 soldiers, including thousands of Northern cavalry, a rank considered equivalent to the Knights of the South. And while their warriors had a reputation for ferocity in combat, the size of their territory, lack of roads, harsh terrain, and spread out population meant they were slow in gathering together their forces. The North was also one of the poorest Westerosi realms, with the snows and cold weather making agricultural production difficult, leaving them to trade timber, wool, furs, and hides, with only the port city of White Harbor as a reasonably lucrative source of wealth. As a result, their nobility lived in conditions that might be considered modest by the lords of the South, while the small folk of these lands often lived in extreme poverty, with the old and weak dying off during the years of winter. Though life could be difficult, the challenges they faced simply to survive in this environment made their people strong, proud, and resilient, able to greatly influence events across Westeros when united in common cause. And so it was that the North played a pivotal role in ending the reign of the Targaryen kings after House Stark was betrayed by the royal family. In 282 AC, word began to spread that Lyanna Stark, daughter of the Lord of Winterfell, was kidnapped by Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, son of the Mad King Aerys II. In response, Lyanna's eldest brother, Brandon Stark, heir to Winterfell, rode to King's Landing searching for the royal prince, only to be arrested by the Mad King. His father Rickard was then summoned to court, where he too was captured, leaving both father and son to be tortured and killed as a spectacle for the king's amusement. After the executions, a letter was sent to the Vale, where Lord Jon Arryn was ordered to arrest and kill Lord Rickard's second-born son, Eddard Stark, as well as Lord Robert Baratheon of the Stormlands, who was betrothed to Lyanna and was a close friend to the Northmen. Yet Jon Arryn had fostered both of these men from a young age, and refused to obey the order, leaving houses Baratheon, Stark, and Arryn to raise their banners in rebellion, plunging the continent into a civil war. In need of more allies, the rebels reached out to their friends in the Riverlands, arranging marriages with the daughters of Lord Hoster Tully, having Catelyn marry the new Lord of Winterfell, Eddard Stark, while Lysa married Lord Jon Arryn of the Vale. Throughout the war, the rebels won a great number of confrontations, eventually leading to the Battle of the Trident, where Prince Rhaegar was killed by Robert Baratheon, and the great Targaryen host was defeated. Following this battle, the Iron Islands and Westerlands joined the rebellion, with Tywin Lannister marching an army to King's Landing and sacking the city, even murdering Princess Elia and Rhaegar's children, thereby securing the throne for Robert Baratheon. With the war won, Eddard traveled south to the Tower of Joy in Dorne, along with 6 companions, hoping to rescue his sister Lyanna Stark. When they arrived, they were opposed by 3 Kingsguard, and engaged in a vicious battle, leaving all dead but Eddard Stark and his friend Howland Reed. Unfortunately, they were too late to save Ned's sister, finding her dying in a pool of blood, where she spoke some final words to her brother, asking him to make a promise and then passing away. Afterwards, Ned took the sword Dawn, which was carried by the Kingsguard Sir Arthur Dayne, and brought it to the man's family before returning north with the body of Lyanna, accompanied by Howland Reed and a baby boy, claiming he was Jon Snow, his bastard son with a wet nurse named Willa, refusing to speak further on the issue. Although Robert Baratheon was now king and Jon Arryn his hand, Eddard Stark wanted nothing to do with the politics of the South, and returned to Winterfell, where he lived in peace for a time, until the Greyjoy Rebellion of 289 AC, when the Iron Islands attempted to declare independence. In order to support his friend and king Robert Baratheon, Lord Stark led a host to join the royal forces, which swiftly defeated House Greyjoy, seeing Lord Balon's last living son, Theon, taken as a ward and hostage back to Winterfell. Having quelled the revolt, the North saw nearly another decade of peace, until 298 AC, when Jon Arryn, Hand of the King, was poisoned to death. Robert Baratheon, unaware there was foul play involved, then named Lord Eddard Stark as his new hand, forcing the Northmen to travel south and engage in the politics he so hated. In order to seal the bonds of friendship between House Baratheon and Stark, the king's firstborn son, Prince Joffrey, was betrothed to Ned's eldest daughter, Sansa. Unfortunately, while the Northmen were always ready for honest battle, they proved ill-prepared for the games of deception being played between the Lords of the South, and soon House Stark found themselves in a terrible position. Some time after returning to King's Landing, Robert Baratheon died in a hunting accident, leaving the realm to his son Joffrey. However, Ned Stark had learned that all 3 of Robert's children were actually fathered by Jaime Lannister, brother to the Queen. Considering himself a man of honor, Eddard attempted to seize power in the name of Stannis Baratheon, Robert's younger brother and true heir to the Iron Throne, but was betrayed by Petyr Baelish and arrested. Against the counsel of his advisors, the new king, Joffrey Baratheon, had Lord Stark beheaded, leaving Eddard's son, Robb Stark, as the Lord of Winterfell. At the age of 15, the young wolf, as he became known, marched an army of nearly 20,000 south, and was soon proclaimed king in the north and the Trident, declaring independence from the 7 kingdoms. As the once united realm fractured in the War of the 5 Kings, Robb Stark proved himself an excellent commander, never losing a battle, yet he was ultimately betrayed and killed by House Bolton and Frey, who sided with the Lannisters in exchange for being given the lordship of the North and Riverrun. However, many were appalled by the betrayal of the Starks and the violation of guest right at the Red Wedding, which was an honored tradition in the North, and so the territory fractured, with some choosing to support Stannis Baratheon as he marched to Winterfell, promising justice and retribution against their shared enemies in House Bolton. Love audiobooks? Then be sure to check out Audible, where they have the world's largest collection available. Simply sign up through the link in the description box below and get 2 free audiobooks to start out. A special thanks to all those who contribute to CivilizationEx, like Simon Toyne, Mystery Knight, and Rabble-Rouser, The Spectral Knight, Lady Anna of House Ayala, and Sir Daeron of House Ashford, Warden of Secrets and Coin, Protector of Gulltown, and Lord of the X. If you'd like to help CivilizationEx, click on the Patreon link, and please be sure to like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and click on the links to see more.